Hey everyone, we're going to go ahead and respect Andrew's time and everyone else's time and go ahead and get started. I'm sure some people are still going to trickle in as we go. So let me take a moment here to introduce Andrew Owlett. He is an entrepreneur, um, started his own company specifically for this reason, for interview skills, and I will let him definitely talk more about himself than I can. Go ahead, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tammy, for kicking us off. And thank you if Lorraine's out there for starting the Emergency Management Growth Initiative, and then to everybody that's involved with the Emergency Management Growth Initiative for the opportunity to be here. Super excited to talk to all 30 plus people that are out there in the Ethernet that have dialed in, called in, whatever you want to call it tonight, to talk about career prep, interview skills, stuff that's super relevant so you can land your next dream job, whatever that might be. As Tammy said, I'm going to do a brief introduction on myself. I'm sharing my screen right now. I hope that everybody can see that. And it gives a little bit of information about who I am, but I'll kind of share with you a little bit more of my story before we go ahead and get started. So I started my career about 15 and a half years ago in the fire department. I was a firefighter, EMT, a lieutenant, hazmat tech, all of that fun jazz. I worked my way through college, did the fire department gig, and really loved every bit of it, and decided to make a career transition out of the fire department into consulting, then into the US federal government, and then to the private sector where I am today. I am my title actually changed today about 3 hours ago, so I'm still working on how to say this. It's not as easy to say as I thought it would be. But I'm a senior manager of business continuity and risk management at Amazon. I lead Amazon.com's arm, specifically in the IT space, their business continuity, supply chain, and risk management programs. So it's really cool to be here to shed light onto just the diverse perspectives that I've had over my career and the transitions that I've made. And then also how over the last year and a half, I've been helping folks very similar to probably people in the audience today that are looking to make a transition or a career shift or get their foot in the door with something. Been helping over 100 people over the last 12 months with their resumes, with career prep. That includes interview skills, just generalized coaching in case you don't know where you want to go or what you want to do, and all of that stuff. So that's a little background professionally on me. Personally, I'm married to my wife, Kristen. We have our dog, Riley, almost 5-year-old yellow lab. We enjoy traveling and doing nothing when we can. We like to decompress as much as possible and recharge. So that's a little bit about me professionally, and then also personally. So as everybody can see on the screen, we have an agenda today. And the agenda, we just went through the introduction, and we're going to jump into pre-hiring, the hiring cycle, and then some common pitfalls that as a hiring manager, I've seen quite a bit. Now, my style is super informal. So I was telling Tammy earlier and a couple weeks ago that if anybody has any questions, drop them into the chat. I'm going to quasi-actively monitor the chat. And if for whatever reason I don't capture something in the chat, we'll definitely touch on it at the end of this series tonight and make sure that your questions are answered. And then just so everybody knows, if for whatever reason there's a bug and we don't answer them, your questions, my LinkedIn's on the screen. Shoot me a LinkedIn request. Let's have a conversation back and forth definitely always happy to help out where I can and when I can. So I'm going to start off this series tonight with just a general statistic that I collected a couple months ago. And that's out of almost 75 people that I surveyed, 65% of those people have spent the last 6+ months looking for a job. 6+ months. Now, everybody's situation is completely different, and everybody's background is completely different, and how they prepare for stuff is completely different. 6 months is a long time to be looking for a job. One of my clients came to me and he was looking for a job for 18 months, a year and a half, looking for a job, unemployed for a year and a half. That's a long time. So the reason I got into this business of helping people with their career is because I want to cut down on that time it takes you to actively apply, interview, and succeed in your career and get you where you want to go. So that's why tonight I broke up the agenda into different phases, because I think they're all super important to be able to understand and then perfect as much as you can to be successful. So let's talk about pre-hiring. This is the part of the hiring process, the life cycle of hiring, whatever you want to call it, that you can do today, tonight, whatever time zone you're in and part of the world you're in, to set yourself up for success later. So I always like to say that your resume has to be good to go at any given time. How to do that? In emergency management, obviously, we know all about preparedness, and you always have to be prepared. You always have to have your business continuity plan ready to go. Well, for your career, you need your career continuity plan. And one of the tools that you put in your tool belt is your resume. You need to have that ready to go. And I always recommend to people, when you change your batteries, hopefully you do twice a year, you update your resume twice a year. That way you can always make sure that if anything were to ever happen to you, or if you wanted to make a career shift pretty quickly for, whatever reason, maybe you woke up one day and you said, I'm tired of working at McDonald's, I really want to work at Subway, right? Like, just as an example, you want to have your resume in your tool belt so you can pull that out and get ready to go, so you can start making subs at Subway. So one of the things that I asked folks also in a survey is, how often do you update your resume? And out of all the folks I asked the survey to, most people said less than 6 months, and that's the range you want to be in. But I want to ask the group tonight, if you can put it into the chat, when was the last time you updated your resume? Now, this is a no judgment zone, okay? If it's been a year and a half, that's perfectly fine. Maybe you'll get something out of tonight and update your resume. But let's see a couple of responses out there. I'm really curious. 2 days ago, oh man, that's awesome. A week ago, 3.5 years ago, that's a little bit long, but we'll get there. We'll work with you. 14 years, that's fine. You may want to get to the 6-month mark. Oh my goodness, this is awesome. So we have a variety of responses. A lot of people are less than 6 months. Some people are more than 6 months, and that's perfectly fine. Keep those responses coming in. They're golden. I love seeing when people update their resume. I think it's super important. So sticking on the theme of pre-hiring, the resume is one critical piece that you have to have in your tool belt. The second critical piece that you need in your tool belt is to know your elevator pitch. Now, tonight, I gave you a long elevator pitch. It was an introduction, super comprehensive in nature. I failed with my elevator pitch. Your elevator pitch, well, let's kind of see. If folks want to be brave and just give me a 1-sentence, what is an elevator pitch? Not what is your elevator pitch, so you can be bold. It's totally cool to be bold. But if you can put in the chat, what is an elevator pitch? And we'll see what their responses come back as. Attention-grabbing statements. I love it. Your description, intro in 30 seconds or less. Great job, Rick. 3 to 5 descriptions of your abilities. Awesome, Sadir. So These are all really, really good. 1 to 2 sentences. Love it. Awesome. How you can capture their attention. Chelsea, I love that. So everybody's hitting the nail on the head. It's 30 to 45 seconds. What you are, who you are, and how are you going to add value to a business, a company, a government entity, a nonprofit. So what, who, and why. Keep that in mind. What you are, who you are, and why you're the perfect candidate for a position. And we can walk into that a little bit later if people have questions on that. But those are really the 3 main components. That's 3 sentences, and that's going to capture somebody's attention super succinctly and very quickly. So my name's Andrew Owlett. I have 15 years of experience in the risk and resilience space. I am super passionate about mitigating disasters from happening. And I am the best candidate for this position because I love the mission of this company and the work that I'm going to do. There we go. If I was interviewing for a job, I just made that up on the top of my head. I also do this for a living. Hopefully I get an A+, maybe a B, but everybody can kind of grade. That's how succinct you need to be with your elevator pitch. So we talked about resume, we talked about the elevator pitch, and now let's talk about another piece that you can do before you go in the hiring process to set yourself up for success. So the third piece is going through a mock interview. Highly, highly recommend it. Interviews are completely different all over the place. They're all over the place. And they quite literally differ from industry to industry, company to company. There are some main components of an interview that we'll talk about a little bit later that are generally the same across the board. But every company, every government entity, there's no single standardization of an interview. And that's why it's so important to practice before you actually get into an interview, because you'll feel more comfortable. You'll be able to test your technology. You'll be able to be independently graded on how well you do compared to the job description. It's almost an actual interview. It's the closest thing you can get to it. And I highly recommend that if you haven't interviewed in a long time, that you go through a mock interview. And one of the pieces, so mock interviews can take an hour, they can take 30 minutes, they can take an hour and a half, depending on what type of role you're going for and how senior you are in a role. One of the things I asked a whole bunch of my clients was, how often did you used to practice for interviews, plural interviews? And people say less than 4 hours. Now, I had a recent client about 2 months ago that she said she spent 30 hours prepping for all of her interviews. And you know what happened? With a big tech company, she got 2 job offers. All that practice really does pay off. It's not the only thing, and it doesn't mean that you can do all that practice and you're guaranteed a job, because nothing's guaranteed, but practice really does help. And she invested time in mock interviews. So we talked about resume, elevator pitch, mock interviews, pre-hiring. We're still in that bubble. The next thing, accomplishment writing. Let me give you an example. I was talking to somebody yesterday and they said, I need help with my resume. I was like, let me see what you have. Show me what you have. I looked over their resume. Not one accomplishment was actually in there. There was nothing quantitative in nature. When I say quantitative, I'm looking for, how many people did you manage or interact with? See what I'm doing there? Manage or interact with. That talks about scope. How big was the program in dollar count if you managed the program? How big was the program in people count? Even if you weren't a people manager, you could be a program manager. How many communications did you send out to ensure that people were getting the right message? And what was the overall satisfaction rate of that? Now, if these are metrics that you don't track, that's fine. There is a way to get quantitative impact in your accomplishments. One of the best ways to do that is to take performance reviews, to take awards and commendations that you may have gotten in the past, and reflect on them. What did you do that was so outstanding that you got that award or commendation, that you got that really good performance review? Take that and capture it and hold on to it. Put it in your resume. Use it for interview prep. So incredibly important. It's important because when you're asked that question about, tell me about a time that you did X, Y, and Z, you can pull on those accomplishments and use those examples from your actual day-to-day, your awards, your commendations, your performance evaluations to set yourself up for success. We've talked about resume, elevator pitch, mock interviews, accomplishment writing. I'm going to keep going. Let's talk about the STAR principle. Now, if you've never heard of STAR, I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a way to answer questions during an interview. It stands for situation, task, action, result. Write it down, STAR, like the stars up in the sky, STAR. Super critical. I'm not going to harp too much on that right now because I only have so much time, but it's a super effective way to describe what you did, how you did it, your actual action, and then the result and impact that you made. Highly effective. Totally recommend it, and it organizes your thoughts. Next piece, networking. 62% of people that I've worked with landed a job through their network only. If you're not on LinkedIn, why not? Get on LinkedIn and send me a request. Let's talk. Make sure you have an all-star profile. If you're on LinkedIn and you don't know what an all-star profile is, look it up. Make sure you hit all the stars. We want to make sure you're successful. So the last piece that I'll say that is super important before I go through all of them really, really succinctly is that you need to make sure before you start applying for a job that you understand your timeline, your skill gaps, and your financial situation. Those are three critical areas. And if you're going through a public safety to private sector or other public sector transition, or if you're going from public to private or private to public, or if you're just trying to land a job, that plan is going to be super helpful. Most people I work with that are transitioning out of public safety, like I did, they don't have a transition plan, actually. They just retired and they said, job market's there, I'm going to get a job. I'm sorry, but that's really hard to do. You can't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to get a job tomorrow. That's a lot of luck. And especially if you don't do really, really good planning, it's probably not going to happen. And if it does, let's buy a lottery ticket. It's super, super complicated. And the job market today is completely different for, especially for folks that are retiring after 20, 30 years, from 20 to 30 years ago, completely different dynamic. The dynamic for interviewing and job hunting today is different from 12 months ago, from 18 months ago, from 2 years ago. Completely different. It changes all the time. Hiring practices are completely being revamped. So you need to come up with that plan. You need to build in a buffer, and you need to go through all the steps I just went through. Make sure, number one, your resume is good to go every 6 months. Make sure you're updating that if you can. Make sure you have your elevator pitch ready to go. 30 to 45 seconds, 2 to 3 sentences, super succinct. Make sure you practice a mock interview if you're a little bit rusty. If you're not, maybe you don't need one. Make sure you understand your accomplishments, what STAR principle means. Make sure you're networking, you're on LinkedIn, you're engaging, you're meeting people. You're just out there learning and grasping and just seeing what people are doing and how that may tie into your career. All of those things are super, super important. And Michael, you hit the nail on the head. Resume does need to be specific to the job you're applying for. There are so many tactics, though, that you can make, and hopefully we have enough time to go into it. Tactics that you can make to make it easier on yourself, that you're not spending hours updating a resume for one job. That's super inefficient, and there are so many better ways to do things to make sure that you land a job. But you do have to be specific about different roles and responsibilities for the job. That's a great call out, Michael. So let's talk about the next piece, the hiring cycle. It's generally how I'm going to describe it, but Not always. Like I said, there's a lot of changes going on. And these changes throughout geopolitical realms, from policy procedures, stuff like that, from just COVID going on, they're continuously having government organizations, private sector organizations, and everything in between evaluate how they hire people. And there have been a lot of lessons learned over the last year that I suspect will be implemented in the future. Generally speaking, the interview process contains a pre-screen, a screen, and an interview. Those are the general components. Now, that's not rocket science, right? Everybody on this webinar is like, okay, I knew that already. Absolutely. You probably did. You should have known that. The pre-screen is either via email or phone. I did say email. Sometimes you're pre-screened via email. I was pre-screened via email. I never spoke to the recruiter in my current company on the phone. I was pre-screened in an email. I know people that are pre-screened on the phone. That's more traditional, but some companies are getting the pre-screening out of the way via email. That's just how it is. My first phone call was with the hiring manager, and that's a screening call. What they're looking for is, are you a potential fit? Do you check some of the boxes, most of the boxes? Do you have the basic qualifications? Do you have maybe some of the preferred? That's what they're kind of looking for at a high level. Some of it's done before the first screening call with the hiring manager. Sometimes it's not. It just really, really depends. Sometimes after a screening call with the hiring manager, you could have a call with the hiring manager's boss. And that call could be a little bit more in depth. Okay, you're a fit, but how much of a fit are you? Are you a fit for this program? Are you a fit for this team? Can we work together? We already know you're qualified, but let's see a little bit more like how qualified you are to work in this dynamic. The next one, the actual full-fledged interview. A lot of times, these types of interviews can be panel interviews. So you can have 2, 3, 5, 6 people asking you a series of questions. The interview time frame for each of these stages is a little bit different. Sometimes they can be 15 minutes for the pre-screen, up to an hour and a half for a panel interview. I've heard panel interviews to even be longer than an hour and a half, but that's an average. And at the end of the day, going through the hiring cycle is so much work and energy. It quite literally drains you. Not only do you have to worry a lot of times, if you're fortunate, about your full-time job, sometimes you have to worry about your family. Sometimes you have to worry about so many other things that are on your shoulders, but you have to worry about impressing somebody that you've never met in your life and making sure that you're the best candidate that they hire today. That's a lot. One of my biggest words of advice is that after each stage of a hiring cycle, that you take a step back, go have a nice dinner, have a lot of water, and sleep if it's at night, or take a couple hours and just decompress and then reflect. Kind of get a handle on, how did the conversation go? Did it flow really well? Was it just really tough and I didn't know what I was talking about? Oftentimes, you kind of can gauge on a conversation. If it's going really well, it's super dynamic, questions are flowing back and forth, and it's just natural, and you have a click with somebody. We are really good as humans to understand what really good human interaction looks like. So just keep that in mind, that go with your gut. Sometimes your gut's wrong. I know I'm my own worst critic, and I always say I fail everything. So, we all have that person in our life, and I'm that person here tonight. But try to take a step back and do an honest assessment of how you did. Now, I'm going to pause for a second. I see a question on the chat that I want to address. It's from Miguel. Is it common to have more than one interview during the screening process? Why have a middleman? Just asking. That's a really good question. Sometimes you do have more than one interview in the screening process, honestly, I think it's super inefficient. That's my personal opinion. I don't think you need to have 12 interviews to know that somebody's a kick butt candidate. Now, that's Andrew's personal opinion. A lot of companies, they're evaluating on different factors that maybe they need different technical SMEs to help assess your aptitude to whatever the job is. Now, a middleman, they could be looking for just different things that maybe are not obvious to you during the interview process. I don't know. Andrew's personal opinion, again, I think you can do the hiring process in 3 interviews or less, 1, 2, 3, month or less, get it done. Sometimes things are more complicated in the background that we just don't see. Sometimes HR can be really complicated. Sometimes funding gets revoked or moved around and you just don't know about it, and it becomes a political mess. I've seen that happen in the government and other jobs. Sometimes a hiring manager leaves suddenly or gets reassigned and the position's on hold, right? There's a lot of reasons why there could be that middleman there. You just never know. So that's a really good question, Miguel. Thank you so much for asking that. So last thing I'll say about the hiring cycle before we go on pitfalls to avoid is there's a lot of controversy out there about what I'm about to say, and that's the thank you follow-up. There's actually a lot of controversy on whether it means anything to send one. Now, I am the type of person that says you can never do too much to show that you're thankful for the time that people spend hiring you or spending time with you. I always say, send the thank you. Now, people say, I'm connected with the person on LinkedIn. Should I send the hiring manager a LinkedIn thank you? I know the email address of the hiring manager. Should I send them a direct thank you? I'm not connected with them on LinkedIn. I'm going to try to connect and say thank you. These are all great things to do. You can certainly do that. But the follow-up that I always hear is the hiring manager didn't get back to me. I hear that so many times, that hiring managers don't respond after a thank you follow-up. That's completely normal. It happens all the time because hiring managers are under a lot of scrutiny. It's an HR process, it's supposed to be closed loop. Don't be offended if you don't get thank you so much for your thank you back, double thank you. Know that 9.9 times out of 10, hiring manager sees it. They just don't want to get in the way of things. So Nelson, I have some great recommendations on writing a thank you. Let's connect after this and I can give you some advice. And if anybody else wants to know that advice, connect with me also. Great question. And honestly, I've also seen little mini rant here. I know I'm supposed to be super professional, and I'm going to be, but I've seen people send thank you donuts. I've seen people send a thank you pizza. Like, these are really clever things that people do to say thank you. I've actually seen those two things happen. So a thank you email goes a long way. You don't have to send anybody a pizza or donuts, but I'm just putting it out there that that's a little bit of a funny situation that I've actually physically seen happen. It's super funny. So just spoke about the hiring cycle. We spoke about screening calls, pre-screening calls, the actual interview and the panel piece. Spoke about the follow-up. Let's talk about pitfalls. So the biggest things that I've seen as a hiring manager is that, like we spoke about earlier about tailoring the resume, people don't tailor the resume. So it causes a lot of questions like, what have you really done? Now, a lot of times the resumes that are not tailored don't make it to the hiring manager, but they can. And that's something to keep in mind, that if your resume is not tailored and it's kind of out there and it somehow makes it to the hiring manager, that's something that you just want to be aware about. Not following instructions during an interview. It's a common thing that I've seen so many times. We're going through a case study interview and I ask the candidate to explicitly do something and they come back and do something that's completely different. It's in the chat as a question, it's verbalized, and it's actually printed in front of them before they even get into the interview and they do something completely different. Always follow instructions. During the interview, not practicing the elevator pitch, not answering the questions at hand, not understanding your accomplishments, not understanding the questions and answering them appropriately, not looking at a camera if you're in a video interview, moving around a lot. I can move a lot, and I probably have during this Zoom interview. And I hope everybody's grading me really, really harshly tonight. But it happens, and you really want to sit still as much as possible and try to control your mannerisms and your motions. Not testing devices if you're in a video interview, not ensuring that you have a backup plan prior to the interview, having devices on loud. The worst thing is when you're in the middle of an interview and your text messages start going ding, ding, ding. It's so annoying. Silence devices, silence your watches, silence everything. Better yet, maybe don't bring it into an interview, though, you know, some people get weird about that. I think the last piece is, I know so many people that during interviews feel like they have to fill white space up and they have to talk the entire time. You don't have to. You can take deep breaths. You can pause. If you answer a question based on the STAR format, you can pause after and say, did I answer your question? Do you have any follow-up questions? You don't have to always fill white space. It's something that I always hear candidates do. It's babbling. It just happens. The other piece is and ah and just awkward type of sentences. You don't have to worry about that either. Other piece, so I want to dig a little bit more into something that I kind of hinted toward earlier, but it's super important as something that you want to avoid as a common pitfall, and that's not understanding your transferable skills. What is a transferable skill? Well, that's a great question. I'm happy everybody asked that. It's something that can be quite literally transferred from one industry to the next. Here are a couple of examples: program management, data analytics, strategic communications, logistics and inventory management, investigations, safety, security. Those are some of the broad skill sets that can be transferred from one industry to another. Technology is super generalized, and there's a lot of different subcategories: cybersecurity, data security, list goes on and on. It's important to know how the skills you have transfer into something that's broad and that can be impactful. Know them, memorize them, mesh them up with your accomplishments. Make sure that you can articulate how your skills can be transferred from one area to another. Why is that important? If you're going into the emergency management field, which I'd imagine, or if you're in the emergency management field, which I'd imagine a lot of people here tonight are, you have so many different roles and responsibilities as an emergency manager. You're not just an emergency manager. You're a program manager. You're a logistician. You're a strategic communicator. You're a data analyst. I mean, the list goes on and on. All those transferable skills that I mentioned can apply to an emergency manager. Let's say one day you're tired of being an emergency manager. You want to be a chief operations officer. You want to be in hospitality. You want to be in transportation and logistics. You want to be in the airline industry specifically. You can quite literally take your skills as an emergency manager, put them into a transferable skill set form, and then apply to other jobs. It's been done. I've done it. A lot of people I know and I've worked with have done it. It's how you market yourself as a professional. You're not just an emergency manager, you're so much more. So tonight, what we went over, and I want to allow enough time for questions. Miguel, I see you have another question. I'll answer that right away after I get through this. We spoke about the pre-hiring phases. We spoke about the hiring cycle. We spoke about pitfalls to avoid. Bottom line is, any sort of interview, you have to practice. You have to make sure you understand your accomplishments in a 1, 2, 3 format. You have to just constantly try and sometimes fail and then adapt and overcome. I see a lot of people that, like I said earlier, they're applying for jobs 6+ months and they're repeating the same things over and over again. They don't know what they have to offer. They don't know what they've done over the last 10 years. They don't know if they're coming out of college, how they can take the skills from different committees in college or different internships and apply them into some sort of entry-level job. They don't know how, maybe they have a time period on their resume that they weren't doing anything because of a personal reason. They don't know how to articulate that. It happens all the time. And on that note, I worked with a mother that took a 3.5-year gap from working, and she was trying to enter the workplace again. And she said, I haven't done anything the last 3.5 years. And I said, no, actually you have. You've done a lot, and let's put that on your resume. You can put stuff like that on your resume. Raising a child, being a mother, one of the most complex things in the world. I'm a male, obviously. I don't know what it's like, but I've seen my mom and so many others, so many other mothers do so many great things. So anyway, I say all of that because it's super, super important to practice, understand what you have to offer, and then articulate it. So just reviewed everything we went over tonight. Miguel, as promised, I am going to answer your question. And then Tammy, I don't know if we have the ability to do this, but if people want to come off mute to ask their question, I mean, I'm totally good with that. Miguel, I don't know if you want to come off mute and ask your question. I mean,
unfortunately, with the webinar platform, it's not an option for them to go audio. So we have the chat, or we have the Q&A box that everybody can type them in, and I can just kind of keep track and see, ask them as they're being put in if you want.
No, awesome. I'll look at Miguel's question and I'll answer it. Thank you so much, Tammy, for helping me out there. So Miguel, you said, I have noticed a separate essay style question along with an interview. What is actually being evaluated? What other skills or competencies are being evaluated outside of the interview, resume, and background check? Awesome question. Okay, so I think I've had 3 times that I've had to write an essay or supply an essay for a position. And I can speak personally at the company that I'm at right now, that writing is how we convey our thoughts to make very big business decisions. And if you can articulate your thought in an essay form really, really well, you actually can learn a lot more than talking to somebody like this about their train of thought. There's a science behind it. Now, that's where I work right now. I don't know about other places, but I think sometimes that what people want to see is that you can write, you can articulate yourself, not only verbally, but also in a written format. And I think that's what they get to. Nelson, the challenge is always discussing why you are leaving an org that wasn't a great fit without seeing a cliche answer. Any advice? So I'll tell you a personal story. About 7 years ago, 6-7 years ago, I was in a consulting role and I was just not meshing well with the client. I was just having a really difficult time understanding like what they wanted. My manager was trying to coach me and I just wasn't getting it. It was a lot on myself, to be honest. And it just wasn't a right fit. No matter how many things I did, it just wasn't right. So I said, you know what, manager, I'm going to start looking for a new job somewhere else. If you have another position in the company, great. I want to be there. I love it. If not, things are not working out for me. I'm just not enjoying this. And when I went to go interview for other jobs, I would actually say that the position wasn't a great fit. The client was just very difficult to work with. And no matter how many times I tried to work with him or her, it just did not work out. And I felt like I wasn't getting a lot of leadership support to actually get through that problem. And I would portray it that way. And it wasn't seen as a bad answer. And how I flipped it was that what I'm really trying to do is focus on how I can listen to needs better, how I can actually take those needs and digest them into something that can be actionable in the future. So I kind of flipped it into a really good learning experience for me. And actually, I spent about 6 to 8 months in my next role really learning how to active listen, how to take what people are saying and digest that, and then turn that into something that can be actionable. Like I said, that can be used to make an impact, to add to new business value. If I was in a consultant, when I was in a consulting role, to add to increasing resiliency and increasing an emergency management posture, stuff like that. Melody, Andrew. Oh, thanks. Oh, thank you, Melody. And thank you,
Andrew,
Minnie.
early on, there was a question, and I don't remember you actually speaking to it. Michael had asked, resumes need to be specific to the job you're applying for. Can you speak to the interview for a specific job versus just a job?
No, I think I understand the question. I'm trying to find the question because I'm going to be honest, Tammy and everybody, this is me being super honest and vulnerable here. I can read a lot better and understand than hear. Like I said earlier, I'm working on that. Can you repeat that question one more time, Tammy?
Sure. It was a little ways up. I think your timestamp would show. Let me find it again. 7:21. Resume needs to be specific to the job you're applying for. So can you speak to interviewing for a specific job versus just any job?
Got it. So number one, thank you, Tammy, for reading that again to me. And then number two, Michael, thank you so much for the question. So if I'm understanding this correctly, so there are some generalized questions that most times come up during an interview, but we don't have to focus on that right now. But some of them are, tell me a little bit about yourself. That ties to the elevator pitch. Tell me about a time that you did X, Y, and Z. That ties to the job description. So when preparing for an interview that's super specific and not generalized, what I would do personally, take the job description, take the bulleted areas that show what they're looking for. What are you going to be doing? Are you going to be developing test training and exercises? Are you going to be communicating with federal, state, and local government? Are you going to be creating metrics to help drive decision making? Take some of the bullets that are in the job description and then start targeting questions around that. Always start out with, tell me about a time that you did X, Y, and Z. That'll help you start thinking about, well, they have this job and it's listed in the job description what they're looking for. They're probably going to start targeting questions around these things that they're looking for. So start coming up with how your accomplishments mesh with the actual job description, and that'll help you tailor the interview specifically to the job. Miguel. And I hope that answered your question. That was a little bit difficult to articulate without asking a follow-up question. Miguel, as new aspiring EMs, should we hang ourselves up with additional certificates if we do not have them? Notice that the market has been extremely competitive where the goalposts are being moved. Are companies more into the certs versus having the higher education? How can new grads get above the cut? So I can speak from my personal experience, and then what I can do is speak from a generalized experience. So I'm going to take kind of two different routes. Me as the hiring manager versus industry. We'll do that. Miguel, I love your question because one of the things that I've tried to change the tone in the emergency management space around is education does not equal competency. And number two, and that ties to certifications as well. And number two, experience is really one of the most valuable components to any job. But in order to get experience, you have to be given a chance. And sometimes those experiences that you get in internships or throughout college can be translated into something that's transferable for a job. So to go back to your question at hand, I think that me as a hiring manager, one of the things that I've done to limit the barrier to entry is that I give the option of having a degree or equivalent years of experience, and I give multiple options for that job category if I can. Sometimes I have restrictions and I have to adhere to my HR guidelines, but I'm trying to limit that barrier to entry. Now, from an industry perspective, certifications are, great measures of that you want to go above and beyond and be considered a subject matter expert in a certain area. Again, they don't always equivalate to competency. So I think a lot of times, people are like, including myself, I mean, I have a lot of certifications at one point, and that was from when I was a lot more junior. And I said, I want to really, really stand out. So I'm going to take all these classes and get all these certs. I did it. And I don't know how much value they actually add outside of the experience that I'm getting today. I think education is important. I don't think it's the only piece to the puzzle. And that's just me being genuine and honest. How can new grads get out the cut of not having a cert? Well, one of the things that I tell the students that I work with, that I actually teach, I teach in higher ed, is if you're starting out in higher ed and you have an idea of what you want to do, get the experience, get the internship, put in the volunteer work. Now, if you don't have the experience, you need to get it somehow. You need to search, and the timeline is going to be a little bit longer. You can always create opportunity. One of the ways I created opportunity in the fire department to get into business continuity is I walked to the subway, going back to my subway example earlier, and I said, what would happen if your subway wasn't here and it burnt down? And the owner was like, I have no idea, I'd be out of a job. And I said, well, can we talk about it a little bit more and maybe come up with like a couple bullets on maybe what you can do to ensure that, if this subway burns down, God forbid, that you have a plan B. That's how I got my foot into business continuity. So whenever there's a new grad coming to me saying, I really want to get a job, my first question back is, do you know what your skill gap is? If yes, let's work on a plan to make sure that you can get the skills to fulfill the job that you want to get. So I hope that answers your question. Looking at John's, I see that there's a couple more questions.
Hey, Andrew, let me add to that. Since I've recently been in the job search market myself, I can say that a degree, depending on where you're applying, can make or break if they'll even look at your application. So another way to kind of answer that question is, where are you applying? Some of the government or federal or those type of organizations, if it says minimum of a degree, a lot of times you're not going to get past the person or the computer system reading your resume without one. I'm actually dealing with that now with some friends down south. They requested me to see if I could reach out to my networks because none of their applicants have a bachelor's degree. Apparently it's a requirement minimum of the job. They can't even look at you without one. So education versus certs, you really just kind of have to know where you're applying. Worst case scenario, call and ask. That's kind of what HR is there for, is be like, hey, I see this is listed. Does one carry more weight than the other? Will you look at me if I have most of the experience? I just don't quite have my degree. I sat for almost 5 years, 2 classes shy of my bachelor's degree, and it really held me up from getting a few job opportunities. And I finally just bit the bullet, went back and finished them and completed it. But in some areas it's important, in some areas it's not.
Tammy, that's a really, really good perspective. And one of the things that I reflect on a lot of times is going back to limiting the barrier to entry. And like I said that earlier, but what I mean by that is that sometimes, not all the time, to your point, sometimes the hiring manager has the ability to change the qualifications up, that education is not the only driver to get somebody in the door. And I think education is valuable and absolutely has its place. And for most government jobs, to enter a GS scale, you need, especially in the federal government, you need to have a degree a lot of times. And that's a barrier to get your foot in the door. And it in other industries that can be kind of adapted a little bit. And that's why I always say kind of it's on the hiring manager. Like, what are you really looking for? Are you looking for somebody that has a PhD and that has no experience? Are you looking for a bachelor's degree and no experience? Are you looking for experience and maybe a little bit of education? There are ways that I think that we can do better as hiring managers and as organizations to limit the barrier to entry there. Right? I think you're spot on. John, how important is it to place in keywords phrases from the job description because of ATS? Is not using those keywords a certain way to get your resume not reviewed? I've heard this question before. ATS is just what it sounds like. There's a lot of myths out there about ATS. The applicant tracking system is quite literally the portal that you go into to submit your application. And there's a back end to that actually analyzes your resume to see like what's the percentage likelihood that you'll be a good candidate for this role based on your resume. But a lot of resumes and organizations, depending on like if they're regulated or not regulated, they actually reach the desk of an HR person who evaluates it, and they could be bombarded with 100 resumes in 24 hours. I can attest that jobs that I posted got 150 resumes in 24 hours, and you can bet that one person is not going to be able to go through 150 resumes in a week for just one position, because these HR people have multiple positions they're looking for. So they're taking a big chunk, they're evaluating it, they're taking a big chunk, they're evaluating it, they're pausing. Hiring manager, this is who we have, this is what you need to do. There's a whole process there. So I mean, sometimes keywords and phrases can certainly help you, but the biggest thing is show impact in your resume. Lay out your resume succinctly. Data points, quantitative values go a long way. There are some do's and don'ts to resumes that on my LinkedIn page, on my company's LinkedIn page, Owlett Career Services, that I list. Some are be wary of hyperlinks. Some systems are very funky when it comes to hyperlinks. You can hide viruses in hyperlinks. Sometimes horizontal lines can throw off how a system like sorts and filters through different things. I mean, there's a whole bunch of tips and tricks out there to just make your resume super succinct. Sometimes you're forced to use a format for a resume. Federal jobs, US federal jobs, you have to use a certain format. But using keywords and phrases, you can pull them out if they're applicable. You can use them in. I've seen mixed success with it. Let's see, I'm just making sure. Nelson, what do you recommend highlighting from public sector and non-governmental organizational experience when applying to the private sector? Nelson, really good question. So I think that going back to what I was saying earlier about transferable skills, it really depends on your skill set. Now, Nelson, I've never met you. I don't know what type of job you're looking for, what type of job you have right now, your education experience, all that fun stuff. But what I can say is that broad brush skills in the public sector, like going back to what I was saying earlier, program management, data analytics, people management, logistics, transportation, like security investigations, intelligence analysis, like broad skills like that bucketed to show impact go a long way. private sector is looking for a ton of different skill sets. Honestly, at the end of the day, they're looking for people that, they can fit this role, but long term at the company, they can fit these roles over here too. In the private sector shifts a lot. Market demand, demand for a product that a company sells, or just the market in general. The private sector entities shift. If they don't, then a lot of times they have data that indicates that they shouldn't, or they fall. We see that a lot. So they're looking for people with a wide variety of skills to fit the position today and the position tomorrow. So that's a really good question. Yep.
In addition to that, I will say that for some reason, career military has a really hard time translating whatever their military experience is labeled as for the civilian sector. I see this question time and time and time again. How can I translate my skills? Well, were you a leader? Were you, there's things that you did that, yes, it had this label for the last 20 years, but just think about what did you do and how would you tell the common person what you did? Well, I led a group of people. Okay, you have leadership skills. There you go. You have management skills. There you go. So that's one of the big questions we see all the time is career military. How do I translate my experience? Like, I know I have this, they're not understanding. I listed all my jobs. Well, they don't understand. I have a hard enough time trying to read federal job descriptions. And that's supposed to be for civilians. I wouldn't even want to try to read the military resume.
Yeah, I think, Tammy, I've worked with a bunch of military, and they come to me and they say, all the stuff you just said, or they say, I was doing, I was on a boat and I was doing mechanics, or I was doing this or that. And to be quite honest, I mean, I tell them that it's going to take a little while for you to do some soul searching to actually understand, what are you passionate about? What are you qualified for? And then if your passion equals qualifications, then that's awesome. If your passion does not equal qualifications, goes back to what I was saying earlier, let's develop that plan together to make sure that your passion can equal your qualifications. We don't want to do something that we're not passionate about. It's bad for a company or organization. It's bad for you. And it just is not productive usages of time. So I appreciate that.
We are coming close on time. I just want to kind of let you know, I want to be respectful of your time and everyone else's. So as long as Andrew's willing to stay here and answer a few more questions, we're good to go. Before I lose too many people here due to time, I do want to say on behalf of EMGI, thank you, Andrew, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for participating. If you do have to cut out early, because different time zones all over the place, this is being recorded. We will put it on our EMGI YouTube. You can follow us there. Please follow us on LinkedIn. Find us on the internet. We have a website, and there's a bunch of different initiatives, not just emergency management as a career, but a whole bunch of different things. EMGI is trying to make the field of emergency management more accessible to the next generation, so we don't have these problems moving forward. It took me over 10 years to get my first paid job in this field, and it shouldn't be that hard. So thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you to Andrew, and I'll let you continue answering questions as long as you have time.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. And if anybody has to drop, I'll answer one or two more questions. I see one for John, and if one other one comes up, I'll answer that. And then if anybody has any questions after this, just hit me up. If anybody needs help with career soul searching and stuff, I have a website for that, and you can check that out as well. Or we can informally chat, whatever. John, is putting a high experienced year counterproductive? I have 4 years in EMS and education, educator working at my local college. But putting 40 years, not a good idea. John, that's a really good question. I've actually had that come up quite a bit. It's personal preference. I'm going to tell you why. I've worked with a variety of people that feel the same way that you do. And they're really worried about ageism in the workplace. And it is something that happens, unfortunately. Some of the ways that you can get around, if you're worried about ageism, number one, the first thing I'll tell you is that with 40 plus years of experience, you have a lot of experience. You're super valuable, and you can add a lot to the table with everything that you've ever seen. That's number one. So if you're worried about it, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that you have a lot to offer, and that I don't want your confidence to be shot down or for you to be worried when you before you even get to an interview. So if it makes you feel more comfortable to say 20 plus years because you're worried about ageism, because you want to build your confidence up, that's appropriate. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Another way to get around it is if you're not applying for jobs that require a certain format. And what I mean by that is that, like we were talking about earlier with federal government jobs, they require a certain format. Most government jobs require a certain format, and you have to put dates tied to different things. You have to put dates tied to your experiences, like actual explicit dates for your education. And I've told people that if you want to avoid some ageism worries and everything, take the month out and just put the year. That's a way to get around it a little bit if you can. So my first thing would be definitely kind of assess your confidence level. And if it's a little bit low and you're really worried about that, then put 20 plus years, make a small modification like that. And then when your confidence gets a little bit higher and everything, you can put it on there and everything. So hope that answers your question. And if you ever need a pep talk, hit me up. Cool. I'll take one more question if there's a question out there at all. And if not, then my LinkedIn's out there, thanks to Tammy. And so many other great resources. Look at that EMGI on LinkedIn link. Everybody should be liking that right now. So cool stuff. Well, Tammy, I think we're back to you.
All right. Well, thank you again for your time tonight. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Again, feel free to reach out to myself, Andrew, follow us, join us on LinkedIn. I don't know if everybody kind of noticed in the chat earlier, he said, networking. I could tell you, I just, got a job offer literally 2 days ago. I start at the end of the month because of my network, my connections on LinkedIn. It started with just a conversation with someone, and I actually had a formal interview before I even submitted an application. So make the connections, especially, build your profile up on LinkedIn. He said, change your resume every 6 months, at least keep an eye on your LinkedIn, be active, start having conversations, maybe at least once a week, flip through it, just talk to people, find people in your field. If there's a job specifically, a job title or type of job that you want, search those people out on LinkedIn, find them by job descriptions, connect with them and ask them, how did you get to where you're at? And then, everyone's path is different, but maybe you can learn something new from them and then move on from there. So hopefully this has been helpful. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions, and thank you for everyone. Good night.
Hey, everyone.